Chiefs traded for Mecole Hardman. Frank Clark's in the building, getting a physical. Let's talk about it.
You either be bold with your predictions or don't say nothing at all. Let's talk some football.
The Kansas City Chiefs have traded for Mecole Hardman. Now, if you look at the Kansas City Chiefs, especially their wide receiver group, you're going to notice something. We've already got 7. 7 wide receivers is the most Andy Reid's ever carried into a season. So you would have to imagine someone's going to have to go. And it's not going to be a fan favorite. People are going to be upset to hear that it's Justin Ross, who's kind of underperformed. Total of 6 targets through 6 games with 3 catches. A lot of Chiefs fans think that Justin Ross is going to be Captain Save-It team, if you will. And I called it for a long time that he really had no business on this roster. Was really just taking up a spot. And now we got Mecole Hardman back, who couldn't really even find a spot on the Jets team, which shows you kind of the confidence that they have left in this wide receiver group. Now, Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes like to hype up this wide receiver group, saying it's not so bad, we're going to be able to experiment, stuff like that. But this move kind of shows you that they believe they need help. And it makes you wonder if they really don't look for a whole nother wide receiver with a little bit more talent, maybe a little bit more cost to kind of help fill out that wide receiver group. Now, Mecole Hardman's not going to have a huge impact on the Kansas City Chiefs. He never really has. And it's kind of why they were willing to let him go. Now, what this move does do is give you a wide receiver that already knows the system. He knows the playbook for the most part. And it kind of gives you another gadget guy besides Tony to run some funky plays that Andy Reid likes to do. Gives you a guy that's capable of motion, jet sweeps. He's not really the greatest of route runners, but really gives some speed. A nice 4-2 guy back on the team. This wide receiver group for the Chiefs kind of looks slow. It's not the speed that we're really used to. Now, we have a great rookie in Rice, but a lot of underachievers. I mean, Watson is pretty much leading this team, and there's a lot of people that called for him not to even be on the team, to kind of give you a inside picture of what this wide receiver group is performing at. So it should be exciting. Mecole Hardman will take a spot. It'll be interesting to see if he does a kick return, punt return kind of duties too, kind of give you another aspect. Even though the Chiefs have been okay-ish there with guys like Washington. And the other exciting news, which I did not see happening, I really truly did not, and that's Frank Clark is back in the building, getting a physical, likely to be signed. It's going to be some kind of veteran minimum $1 million cheap, thanks for being back on the team kind of deal. But he's really just going to be a rotational piece. You're not going to see a huge performance out of Frank Clark. We'll be lucky if we see 3 sacks on the remainder of the season for Frank Clark. But what you look for with Frank Clark has got to be those postseason sacks. Him leaving the Broncos, Frank Clark leaving the Broncos, really opens up that possibility he could have the playoff sack record. He had 0 chance in Denver for that, but now it's back on the table. It's nice to see Chris Jones possibly getting his buddy back. This is real interesting for these young defensive ends like King Carl and Amanahu and the guy that I forget his name that we drafted. He hasn't done a ton, but he's been okay in rotation. Then you got guys like Mike Dana who have just been stellar, especially for a rotational piece. And you can kind of move him inside, but he kind of creates a crowded defensive end room, which is kind of interesting to see for the Chiefs to do. But you got to kind of like it for the postseason possibilities. You know, he shows up great in January. It's never been a Frank Clark a problem for him to show up late in the season. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I really didn't see them bringing Frank Clark back for the simple reason that if you're going to try to replace Chris Jones, you really need these young defensive ends to step up and show what they can do, have as many snaps as possible, you know, as many pass rush attempts as possible to kind of really develop them. And to me, this Frank Clark thing just solidifies the fact that Chris Jones will be getting re-signed and brought back to Kansas City, because they've looked around and seen there's not a lot of pass rush available. Now, Frank Clark's not going to replace any of these young defensive ends. This is really just a cheap rotational piece that you can be happy with. Tons of upside in the playoffs. But we all know what we're getting out of Frank Clark. We've been down this road. We know what we're getting out of Hardman. We've been down that road. You know, if Hardman has 250 yards at the end of the season, I would call this trade a success. Now, don't forget, we're live every Wednesday, 9:30. We will be talking about it tonight, I'm sure. Tune in and check us out. Bold predictions.